Funding for Frontline is provided by this station and other public television stations nationwide, and by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.
Tonight, on Frontline, the conflict in Central America, which the headlines ignore, El Salvador. The U.S. has spent nearly $3 billion here. But many people say the real problem is not the communist guerrillas, but poverty and despair. Is U.S. policy here failing?
It has not produced either peace nor has it really strengthened the people in their democratic commitment.
Tonight, our forgotten war.
From the network of public television stations, a presentation of KCTS Seattle, WNET New York, WPBT Miami, WTVS Detroit, and WGBH Boston. This is Frontline with Judy Woodruff.
Good evening. During President Reagan's second term, the debate here in Washington about our policy in Central America has focused on Nicaragua and, more recently, Panama. But the U.S. has been putting its money into El Salvador. Since 1980, we have supported the government of El Salvador with more than $3 billion in economic and military aid, nearly 10 times the amount given to the Nicaraguan Contras. The U.S. government now contributes more to the Salvadoran budget than the people of El Salvador do. This enormous investment was aimed at defeating the leftist guerrillas in El Salvador and in creating a centrist democracy there, a model for the rest of Central America. Tonight, Frontline examines the impact of the American program in El Salvador. Producers Mark Cooper, George Mall, and Richard O'Regan of Christian Science Monitor reports gained unprecedented access behind guerrilla lines and returned from El Salvador with a portrait of a troubled land. Their report is called Our Forgotten War.
The people of El Salvador, we've heard, weren't ready for democracy. The only choice was between the left-wing guerrillas and the violent right. And many insisted that it was the guerrillas that truly had the backing of the people. But with your support, we were able to send help in time.
What got there was a massive aid package that in El Salvador has come to be called the American Project. This is its military face. A barricade of humanity and steel in the path of hemispheric revolution. The hardware, abundant, expensive, American. The soldiers, Salvadorans. The poor, a peasant army.
¿Y quién es el enemigo? Bueno, son los comunistas.
To Salvadoran military leaders, the nature of their opponent makes American involvement almost inevitable.
Por una agresión marxista.
When we were threatened by Marxist aggression, we decided to call upon our natural allies to protect us, the United States of America.
Since 1980, U.S. support has transformed the Salvadoran Army into Central America's most technically advanced and fully equipped military. An army fueled by hundreds of millions in U.S. tax dollars, polished and oiled by American advisors, and supported by a U.S.-supplied fleet of warplanes and helicopter gunships. Elite infantry battalions trained by U.S. experts are airlifted into the mountainous countryside. They stalk the leftist guerrillas. This has become America's war. the longest sustained U.S. military commitment since Vietnam. When the American project began 8 years ago, the fighting was confined to a few guerrilla strongholds. Now it has spread to every corner of the country as the rebel forces break down into small mobile units, a strategy designed to cope with the government's superior air power. A strategy that has led the Salvadoran army to spread itself thin. Casualties are alarmingly high. As many as 1 in 10 soldiers are killed or wounded every year.
Ya murió, loco. Chao, todavía está vivo, pues. Pues sí, que lo levanten ya, que lo lleven.
After nearly a decade of war, neither side has a clear advantage. The numbers of casualties are disputed, but it is estimated that more than 100,000 Salvadoran citizens have been killed in the war or political violence since 1980. "70 miles southeast of San Salvador, in the country's mountainous eastern region, lies the provincial capital of Usulután. Surrounded by contested territory, the city is defended by 2 major garrisons. Thousands of troops are pinned down in cities like this one, defending bridges, roads, and power lines against the guerrillas' unpredictable assaults. Usulután has not seen a guerrilla attack since 1982. On the night of February 17th, the war strikes. Automatic weapons fire, grenades, and mortars awaken the people of Usulután. In the heart of a city supposedly controlled by the Salvadoran army, the garrison is under siege. The casualties, 20 soldiers and 3 guerrillas. Seven civilians are killed, 4 of them children. The army says by guerrilla mortars.
We can't say for sure what hit the house, because it was totally destroyed. Destroyed. Everyone inside was killed, including our grandchild.
In the aftermath of the attack, the townspeople are angry.
Why is there so much war here?
Who knows?
What's that you said, sir?
Hunger. Hunger.
Hunger is the cause of war?
Yes.
Why?
It's the injustice. The government promised us things that have all turned out backward. Everything's bad. It's done nothing. So much aid that's been given to this government, and we've gotten nothing.
That afternoon, the people of the town mourn their dead. In El Salvador, it is a familiar scene. 2% of the entire population has been killed in this conflict. Most of the dead have been civilians. For those caught in the crossfire, there is anger toward the continuing fighting. and toward the political face of the American project. The government of President Jose Napoleon Duarte, which cannot seem to end the war or address its causes. The government's unpopularity is a major concern for the United States, which has invested $3 billion trying to create in El Salvador a moderate civilian democracy, a pro-American alternative to Marxist Nicaragua.
You will find this country, the United States of America, eager to stand beside those nations which respect human rights and which promote democratic ideals.
The American project began in 1979, when President Carter gave significant political and financial support to an alliance of military and civilian reformers who had overthrown the country's military dictator. The new Salvadoran government promised that after 50 years of military rule, a true democracy would be established. They hoped to undercut a simmering leftist guerrilla movement with a program of land redistribution and economic reforms. For 50 years, the country's tremendous disparities of wealth had sparked unrest and rebellion.
One of the things we did was demonstrate to the Salvadoran government that as long as they were moving toward democracy, that we would help them out economically and militarily.
But the Salvadoran military, now with U.S. financial backing, began a campaign of bloody repression against the reform movement. With the aid of government security forces, the death squads killed thousands. The reform movement was wiped out.
I was a member of the governing party. I was a member of the leadership of the party, the political commission, and I was almost in hiding all the time. Sleeping in one house one night, sleeping in a different house in a different night.
Zamora fled into exile in 1980. After his brother Mario, also a member of the government, was murdered in his home by members of a right-wing death squad. Moderate politicians abandoned their hopes of working with the government. Many threw their support to the cause of revolution. On the eve of President Reagan's inauguration, the guerrillas began what they called the final offensive, an attempt to provoke a popular uprising against the U.S.-supported government. The attempt failed, and the guerrillas retreated to the hills to build a revolutionary army. Washington continued to support the military government and its civilian leader, Christian Democrat Jose Napoleon Duarte. American pressure on the Salvadoran military helped Duarte hold back the challenge posed by the extreme rightists and their leader, former Army Major Roberto D'Albazon. D'Albazon was widely believed to be the man who had organized the death squads. His Arena party represented El Salvador's traditional rulers, the wealthy landowners and military leaders who resisted any change in the nation's social system. With the left afraid to campaign openly, Arena became the only political party capable of opposing the government. But in the 1984 presidential elections, Duarte defeated D'Albazon. The U.S. government was now satisfied that Salvadoran democracy was firmly in place. El Salvador faded from the headlines. In Washington, support for the Duarte government was no longer controversial.
We're really allied with the good guys here. I mean, our people in the United States, we cannot expect them to support a foreign policy that does not support decency and democracy and attempt to improve justice systems and attempt to improve the standard of living, and we're with those kind of people.
But the ruling Christian Democratic Party has fallen into disarray and recrimination after a series of defeats at the polls and accusations of corruption, problems made worse by President Duarte's failing health. Last month, he turned his office over to the vice president and left the country for medical treatment. In the streets, anti-government protest has reappeared. Much of it led by President Duarte's disgruntled former allies. The rightist Arena Party is confident that popular discontent will bring it to power in next year's presidential election. And in the countryside, the guerrilla army remains strong and confident of victory. Opposition politicians like Ruben Zamora, after years of exile, have returned, not to participate in the American-inspired elections, but to overthrow the government the U.S. supports.
Who is not at war with this government in this country, you know? You take from the richest people to the poorest people, everybody is at war with this government.
In El Salvador today, most people live in the political and military no man's land, controlled by neither the government nor the guerrillas. This is the town of San Fernando. Most of the year, the town is under guerrilla control. The guerrillas held it in March of this year when the rest of El Salvador held national elections. Now, 2,500 government troops have been moved into the area. Under their protection, the election for mayor will be held a month late. The candidates have never appeared in town. Neither party has campaigned. Mayors and candidates are considered by the guerrillas to be part of the war against them. More than a dozen have been killed in the last few years. The new mayor, like the current one, will live and work 30 miles away in government-protected territory. And like the mayor, the voting process itself must be protected by government troops who are rarely seen in San Fernando. Voters, many of whom have walked for hours, must pass a military checkpoint at the entrance to town. In the town square, there are more soldiers. But hours after the voting was to begin, there are no civilian authorities. No one is sure when or where the balloting will take place.
It's already 9 in the morning. Where are the ballot boxes?
We don't know. They haven't told us anything.
How are the ballots going to get here?
Who knows? Probably by helicopter. Because if they try to bring them in by road, they'll get burned. It isn't safe.
Just after 10, by Army helicopter, the ballots and the election officials arrive. They set up booths, but still no one can vote. There is confusion over what kind of registration card is valid.
Aquí hay uno. Este señor pidió votar aquí en San Fernando.
The official who can make the decision has yet to arrive.
Are you going to be able to vote today?
I don't know. That's what we all want to know. If we can't vote with just ID cards, then everyone here is going to have to leave now because they live so far away.
You want to vote?
Of course I do.
Why?
It's a citizen's duty. We're all citizens. It's to prove that we're citizens. We elect our president, our mayor, our officials. That's why we're here.
Do you know the candidates today?
No, nobody knows them.
Why not?
They've never come here.
11 a.m. The remaining officials arrive on another helicopter. After a short debate, they disqualify more than half of those who are here. Some have come to the wrong town. Others have had their voting cards taken away by the guerrillas.
Esta señora no puede votar aquí, pero este señor sí puede votar aquí porque van a aparecer en los listados que traemos.
Voting begins.
Ahí. ¿Le digo? Ahí va la cola.
Why are you voting for Arena, not the Christian Democrats?
Because that's who we decided to vote for.
For any special reason?
No special reason. That's just who we're voting for.
Why?
Well, that's who we're going to vote for because that's who we decided to vote for.
Who is the Arena candidate?
We don't know.
Have you decided who to vote for?
I don't know. The truth is, I don't understand any of this.
And you, ma'am?
Same for me.
Who'd you vote for?
I just chose anyone. Who knows who? I never heard of any of them. People vote because they're afraid that if they don't vote, something can happen to them.
7 people were taken away by the Army when San Fernando was secured for the election the week before. Those who remain fear the Army will treat them as guerrilla collaborators if they can't prove that they have voted.
What can happen is that if you go down the road and the soldiers check your card and see that you haven't voted, then they suspect you, and you can have problems. That's the reason people come to vote. Not because they understand or know who they are electing. Here there aren't even any candidates.
Do you think the people knew the difference between one party and the other?
I doubt it. I doubt if they knew any difference.
With the voting finished, the election officials asked the soldiers to radio for a helicopter. The helicopter carries away the ballots, the officials, and along with them, any trace of the Salvadoran government. The Army remains in control of the town. It does not control the countryside around it. 5 miles outside of San Fernando, reporters are waved down by guerrillas. The rebels want to explain their opposition to the election and discuss the progress of the offensive that is being conducted in the area against them.
We have a communique from our command, and then we'll take any questions you have. So do you accept?
A press conference is assembled a few yards off the road. The questions are relayed by walkie-talkie to the rebel commanders and carried in full on the guerrillas' radio station, Radio Farabundo Martí.
Desatando una brutal represión y terror, aprovechando la cobertura que puede darle el show electoral en San Fernando para que dicha represión pase desapercibida.
The press conference lasts more than an hour. Less than 1 minute's helicopter flight from the nearest government-controlled town.
El resultado de este propósito, un total fracaso. Seguimos presentes en todas partes y accionando en la retaguardia del operativo.
The mountainous region along El Salvador's border with Honduras has been a traditional sanctuary for guerrilla operations. The insurgents who stopped the press outside San Fernando are based in this province of Chalatenango. But it is in this northeastern province of Morazan where the guerrilla army, known as the FMLN, maintains its most secure zone of control. The last army outpost in this region was dislodged 5 years ago. Now the town of Perquin is the unofficial capital of what the FMLN refers to as Free El Salvador. The government army can occupy this town and the territory around it. For several months last year, it did, but it can only hold the town for short periods of time. Most of the year, Perquin remains a place for revolutionary fighters to rest between offensives and to prepare for new ones.
Que estamos peleando con el ejército
We're really fighting the U.S. Army. If it were not for American help, we would have won this war a long time ago.
These are the Special Assault Commandos, the Guerrilla Elite Strike Force. Their commander is a former Salvadoran Army officer, schooled by the American Army in counterinsurgency. In 1981, he defected to the FMLN. Since then, he has used his expertise to drill insurgents. He's now the chief of the guerrillas' military operations.
This unit we are training here will overrun and destroy the enemy's strategic positions.
The Salvadoran Army has yet to develop effective tactics to fight these revolutionaries. The guerrillas are trained to pursue a strategy opposite that of the Salvadoran military machine. To fight a protracted war of infiltration and surprise. A war the guerrillas believe the Salvadoran military has neither the ability nor the commitment to fight.
I've been in both armies. The big difference is in the sacrifice and commitment of the Revolutionary Army. Its determination to fight doesn't at all depend on outside factors, but rather on the political and ideological commitment of each soldier. Each one knows exactly why he is fighting.
And it has organized a large network of supporters and collaborators. Their clandestine radio stations are the voices of the revolution, carrying the message of the rebellion's tactics and purpose to an audience who, the guerrillas say, is more and more inclined to listen.
Trabajador, pasa la consigna.
Tu arma es el fuego.
Acumular gasolina.
Botellas vacías.
Tela de algodón.
Fabrica el armamento popular.
Pasa la consigna.
Tu arma es el fuego.
Tu arma es el fuego.
Todos al combate.
Hay una coyuntura interna en El Salvador muy
There's a very special set of circumstances now in El Salvador. An extreme sharpening of the economic, social, and political crisis. It's much worse now than it was when the war broke out in 1980. It's much harder now for the people.
FMLN commander Joaquin Villalobos is the leader of the revolutionary forces. This is his first interview with the U.S. media.
The relationship between our forces and the people has been greatly improved and cemented. Because of that, the likelihood of a victory on our part is very high.
In the capital of San Salvador, the American ambassador is confident that the Revolutionary Army is in decline.
I think that we have broken the back of their military might already. There are probably 1,000 fanatics that can stay out there for a long time.
The Reagan administration considers the Salvadoran guerrillas to be part of an international Marxist movement and says they can keep fighting only because they are armed and supported by a network of terrorists and subversives.
They're training in Cuba, training in the East Bloc in the Soviet Union, training in Libya, training in Nicaragua. I mean, the support apparatus for the Salvadoran guerrillas is clearly established. These are hardcore communist guerrillas. They're hardcore communist guerrillas. They have no interest in participating in a democratic system. They don't believe in it.
In the hills of Morazan, the guerrillas answer that it is the United States that hinders democracy in El Salvador. When the wishes of the people truly become known, they say, it will be the Americans who are cast out.
No, no, no a la intervención. El pueblo quiere revolución. No, no, no a la intervención. El pueblo quiere revolución.
Los mandos, los coroneles, todos los oficiales que...
The military officers responsible for murder, those who still murder today, are the ones in power. That sort of impunity does nothing to permit free political expression. You know, if you go into the streets to protest, your life is hanging by a thread. You're risking your future. So under those conditions, how can you talk about democracy? This is a dictatorship. A military dictatorship disguised as a civilian government.
The FMLN rejects the idea that El Salvador's current government can or wants to make the reforms the country needs. And they say an American-style system will not work here.
Y ahora eso implica un modelo económico social que haga cambios.
Does our model imply radical change? Yes, it does. Is our model in some ways socialist? Yes, it has to be. And it shouldn't frighten anyone. You have to understand that we cannot copy your model. You built your capitalist system by oppressing and exploiting our continent. But we don't have anyone to exploit to build the same society you have. Where are we going to get our slaves? From whose mines are we going to take the riches? We have none. We must build our society with our own labor. Just let us get on with it.
In response to the U.S. allegation that their revolution is foreign supported, FMLN leaders say they have the right to buy weapons from wherever they can. The foreign source of most of their guns, they say, is the Reagan administration. They are either captured from the Salvadoran army or purchased from another American-financed force, the Nicaraguan rebels.
Are you buying guns from the Contras?
Yes, we buy from the Contras.
The Contras deny the charge, but FMLN commander Roberto Roca insists that the Contras are indeed selling some of their weapons to the Salvadoran guerrillas.
So, guns paid for with U.S. tax dollars and earmarked for the Contras are winding up in our hands. Fortunately, they're now in good hands, going for a good cause.
Whenever they can, the guerrillas make their own. From homemade uniforms to home-brewed bombs and explosives, the guerrillas are developing their own weapons industry. Regional Commander Jonas has called local guerrilla leaders together for a firing test of what they call popular armament. Artillery is made from the crudest of materials.
We wrap all this in a burlap bag. Then we tie it with hemp so that the shrapnel won't fall out in flight. You want it to explode and expand when it hits the enemy forces.
A piece of pipe becomes a mortar. Discarded shell casings, a grenade. The testing is interrupted. A government plane is heard overhead. One of the fleet of American-supplied A-37 bombers.
Más o menos como al norte va. Sí.
The plane passes. Testing is resumed. This time a landmine, fashioned from a tin can.
¿Vas a poner fierro ahí?
¡Venimos para luchar! ¡Pasó, amigo!
The guerrilla forces feel they can fight this kind of war indefinitely. Their stamina and the tactics of their enemy, they believe, will enable them to win what both sides declare to be the crucial battle in this war, the battle for the loyalty of the Salvadoran people. San Fernando de Morazan is one of several towns the guerrillas point to as examples of how the government drives people to support their revolution. The town was destroyed by government air raids, a tactic designed to dry up civilian support for the guerrillas.
En lo cual ahí murió una niña de 2 años.
They killed a 2-year-old girl. They killed a 5-year-old girl. And they killed their mother too. Other neighbors also died.
pobladores.
And that's what this government has given us.
These men now form part of a town council set up with guerrilla encouragement.
La B y la E, B. La B y la I, B.
When the Salvadoran government refused to fund a school, the town council built its own
Fíjense bien la que les estoy...
and hired a teacher.
La B y la I, B.
The school bell is made from a spent helicopter rocket. With guerrilla encouragement, this women's committee has organized to bring food into Pekin, to smuggle it past army roadblocks. The committee provides lunch for the school children twice a week. Here, deep inside rebel territory, the government blockade has made supplies too scarce to ensure that everyone receives what they need. Cut off from adequate food and medical care, this 2-year-old was claimed by the #1 killer of Salvadoran infants: diarrhea and dehydration. The only portion of the $3 billion in U.S. aid these people see are the weapons used against them. In the capital of San Salvador, the center of government control, living conditions have declined over the course of this war. It is a city choked with refugees and poverty. In the last 10 years, the population of San Salvador has doubled. Consumer buying power has dropped 50%. Half the population has no access to clean drinking water. 1 in 4 Salvadoran children is malnourished. This is San Miguelito, a typical neighborhood in San Salvador. People here live in shacks constructed along a river choked with sewage and trash. The Miranda family moved here 7 years ago after the war drove them from their farm. 13 people, 3 generations, 2 rooms.
What can you feed your family now?
Right now, beans are pretty expensive, so we buy what we can, when we can. Some eggs, maybe some sour cream for 50 cents. It's enough for 1 meal. You get what you can, maybe a pound of sugar, a pound and a half of beans, because 2 pounds now cost too much.
Have you asked for a salary increase?
Well, that's not allowed. You can't ask for a raise. You know, it's a government job. If we ask for a raise, they fire us. If you want to get along, you keep quiet.
Oscar Miranda works as a printer for the government. His father and brother also contribute full-time salaries to the household. By Salvadoran standards, this family is doing well. Half the population has no job at all. They live like the people of Rio Las Cañas, trying to support themselves however they can. The people here are refugees who have come to the outskirts of San Salvador looking for peace or for work. They earn their money by digging sand out of the riverbed and loading it onto trucks for use in construction projects.
Can you support your family with what you make here?
No. God knows we can't. With the needs we have, only God can help us. When we don't have money, I send my wife with 10 cents up to the store to buy fish skeletons for soup. They strip off the meat and leave us the head and the bones. That's what we eat.
As in every community in El Salvador, the war is never far away.
How much will the three of you make?
$2.
For how much work?
For a truckload. $2 for the three of us.
When did you start doing this work?
Since my father died.
Arturo's father and two other river workers were taken away by armed, uniformed men on the night of April 14th of this year. A week later, they were found dead of gunshot wounds in shallow graves an hour down the road. Arturo's mother says her husband was taken away by Air Force infantry troops.
I'm afraid all alone here. My children are all boys. I'm afraid the same can happen to them that happened to my husband. I'm afraid for the boys. Scared.
Trouble started here when the river workers began to organize. There was a dispute with this landowner who claims the riverbed is private property. He erected a fence to keep the workers from digging on the land he claims.
At first, some men came from the union. They wanted to see about taking that fence down. That's when that rich man told us that little by little he was going to get rid of all of us who dig the sand. That's what he said.
Not long afterward, the three men from Rio Las Canas were kidnapped and murdered.
They're all working here illegally. They're squatters. None of them have title. They don't own any of this land. They haven't paid anything for it.
You're armed. Do you feel threatened?
Yeah, sure. We're constantly threatened.
By whom?
By all these people.
These people over here?
Yes, by all of them. By agitators and union leaders.
How have they threatened you?
They said they're going to shoot me. Machine gun me.
Are any of you armed?
No, no one here has any weapons. All we have are hoes to cut down the weeds. No one has any weapons. We're just poor people. He's the only one around here who is armed, and that's to threaten us.
In the history of this conflict, only one soldier has ever been prosecuted for the killing of a Salvadoran civilian. 65,000 civilians have been killed in the last 10 years.
I'm afraid. I'm afraid because they took the others away without us knowing why. They can take me away for no reason at all.
Despite the murders, the workers continue to dig sand from the riverbed. They have no place else to go and no other way to make a living.
My real fear is that I don't know who wants to kill us. It's nothing but hatred, pure hatred.
In San Salvador, the war and economic devastation that it has brought with it has opened the door to political defiance. On the steps of the National Cathedral, they sing of revolution and in praise of El Salvador's revolutionary martyr, Farabundo Martí. 5 years ago, this concert could not have been staged. Its organizers would have been in hiding, in exile, or dead.
Dicen que vieron pasar a Farabundo Martí, por Izalco, Guayúa y León, por Sonsonate y Quiché, por Nicaragua y El Salvador, por Guatemala pasó, con su luz de liberación, Farabundo llegó.
The site of the concert, the plaza in which protesters had been killed by Salvadoran troops, is a powerful political statement.
Se acerca la insurrección, echaremos fuera a Duarte, al ejército y su patrón, porque ahora ya estamos claros, nuestra participación, todo este pueblo guanaco vencerá la intervención. No tenemos ni frijoles, ni mucho menos zapatos, pero tenemos razones de construir este naco.
Even more powerful, the appearance of this ensemble, seen here in public for the first time since 1980. It is the official musical group of the guerrilla army.
Dígale que no se meta, dígale que no se meta, porque aquí se romperá la guerra de Santana a la Unión.
The American project helped make open political protest possible, hoping to draw the left into supporting peaceful change. But the freedom to speak is now used to demand the violent overthrow of the American-supported government.
¡Revolución o muerte!
The next morning, 20,000 workers came into the streets to confront the government. It is May Day, 1988. Some of the marchers have traveled many hours in buses or on foot from the remote countryside. They spray paint slogans demanding food and jobs. Many of the nation's unions supported the government in the 1984 elections. Since then, suspicion and hostility have grown on both sides. The government abandoned a promise to enact social and economic reforms. In response, the unions have moved increasingly to the left. Troops and riot police defend the American embassy, a traditional target for those who see the United States as the force that keeps this government in power. Students and urban commandos burn telephone junction boxes as acts of open defiance and economic sabotage. The government considers these marchers, even their former allies among them, to be guerrilla collaborators. Many cover their faces to prevent the security forces from identifying them. The marchers are harassed by military planes and helicopters. A bomber drops pro-government leaflets. The rally is tense. Riot troops block several nearby streets. In the past year and a half, government security forces have killed more than 10 union officials. Several others have disappeared after arrest. Suspected police informers are cornered by the commandos. A military helicopter circles so close it is difficult to hear the speakers. The crowd responds with taunts and chants of solidarity. The speaker, Ruben Zamora, like many of the marchers, is a former ally of President Duarte and a former supporter of the American project.
Y el ministro de Relaciones Exteriores de Reagan decía hace 7 años que iban a trazar la línea para parar la revolución en El Salvador. En El Salvador no han podido trazar ninguna línea. Los únicos que han podido trazar líneas en este país son las fuerzas del pueblo que los han hecho ir retrocediendo cada vez más.
But the right wing is pushing too. It remains strong, and it remains opposed to any kind of social reform. Tonight, the city's wealthy elite has come out to raise money for the Arena party. Dinner is $100 a plate, more than double the monthly per capita income. This march, Arena dealt a devastating blow to the ruling Christian Democrats when it won control of the National Assembly. Arena mayors preside over 2/3 of the nation's cities. Its leaders, including former Major Roberto D'Aubuisson, believe El Salvador's political future is in their hands.
Mire, claro que la hay, hemos tenido contacto ahora de que ellos montaron todo un aparato.
They set up a whole propaganda machine, saying the best thing the U.S. ever did for El Salvador was to bring us this guy named Jose Napoleon Duarte. He was supposed to be the big star, the star quarterback, but he wasn't even fit to sit on the bench and pick up fumbled passes. Now the Americans have the tough job of explaining to their own people that it is ARENA that has the support of the Salvadoran people.
When the American project began, the U.S. promised to push the extreme right wing out of power. But 8 years later, ARENA is El Salvador's leading electoral force. The party declares that while American aid is needed, it rejects the strings of political and military reform the U.S. has attached to that aid.
If we play around with strategies made in the USA, we're finished.
Sigfrido Ochoa, a former Army colonel who led a rebellion against the Duarte government in 1983, is now an ARENA member of Congress.
This is a dirty war. But the United States thinks that by making concessions to the communists, they can hold them back. But while a human rights policy is well-intentioned, it ties the hands of the government. It ties the hands of the armed forces.
U.S.-educated businessman Alfredo Cristiani is ARENA's most moderate public face, the man considered most likely to be El Salvador's next president. Cristiani considers the U.S.-backed land, economic, and social reforms to be misguided and a failure.
It's very obvious that the countries that are better off economically use the private enterprise system. So why use some other sort of formula where it doesn't work?
Finally, in Latin America then, what country would you point to as an example of the sort of system that you think would work for El Salvador?
Chile.
ARENA's admiration of the politics and the tactics of brutal dictatorships like that of Chile's General Augusto Pinochet have been the reason that the U.S. has striven to keep the party out of power. But ARENA's success at the polls has favorably impressed some American lawmakers.
ARENA won it fair and square. They had really good people out at the polls. They worked the crowds well. They were clean-cut, they were constructive, and they were pro-USA. They were wearing red, white, and blue aprons. And they wanted to identify with us. Now, I would just say, I came back and I read that D'Aubuisson had won the election, that death squads were back, that somehow the president's policy was in disarray. Well, not so.
But some critics contend the American program is fundamentally flawed because it addresses the symptoms but not the causes of the Salvadoran rebellion.
You cannot find a military solution to a problem of illiteracy, a problem of hunger, a problem of polluted water, a problem of no medical access for either pregnant mothers or for children once they are surviving the birth. Those are social, economic, political problems that can never be found at the end of a barrel or rifle.
Senator Hatfield is co-author of a recent congressional report on El Salvador entitled Bankrolling Failure.
In many ways, the President Duarte has an impossible job under the current emphasis the United States has on maintaining the war. We are as much, if not more, concerned about maintaining a military action, a military confrontation, looking for a military resolution of social, political, economic problems.
I mean, when you have a group of armed guerrillas who are committed to taking over the country by force, what choice do you have except to continue the war? So to blame U.S. aid for continuing the war is, it seems to me, both irresponsible and disingenuous. Of course we're continuing the war. Of course we are. There's nothing wrong with that.
I see that in both parties, in the leadership of both parties, in the mainstream of both parties, there is very strong support for what is going on here. At the extremes of both parties, there is some criticism. But I think that this is a place where we do have bipartisan support and for policy, and I expect that consensus will hold.
A consensus in Washington that this war, now mostly forgotten in the United States, must continue in El Salvador. In El Salvador, the people wait. They wait for the end of a war that has killed more than 100,000 of their people. Twice as many as the number of American soldiers killed in Vietnam. They grow increasingly poor as they wait for the democracy and justice that the warriors say they are trying to create. They wait for the peace that all sides have promised, but none have secured.
Last week at the Walter Reed Army Medical Center here in Washington, surgeons operated on President Duarte for stomach cancer. Doctors expect that Duarte will live for only a few more months. On Capitol Hill, there are no indications that Congress will soon reevaluate U.S. policy toward El Salvador. The next chapter of the American project is unlikely to be written before the arrival of a new president in Washington in January and a new president in San Salvador next March. Thank you for joining us. I'm Judy Woodruff. Good night.
Next week on Frontline, life on an Indian reservation. The Quinault Indians have one of the most beautiful reservations in America, but they also have serious problems with alcohol, drugs, and unemployment.
There's nothing solid here to give people confidence that their tribal government is actually delivering their future to them.
Watch Indian Country on Frontline.